Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog with Riot Mortdog. I love how silly that is. You'll notice I'm not walking. I already did my walk this morning. I tried to record this once, ran into some tech issues. I'm, you know, it's not been a great morning for recording this, but I really want to get this to you guys. So I'm trying one more time from the comfort of my home. If anything goes wrong, I give up. I'll try again tomorrow, but hopefully I can get through this, and hopefully there's no tech issues and we can just get a nice, quiet recording where nothing goes wrong. Okay, so it's Wednesday. It is Wednesday. It's patch day. And for those who don't know, I go through this ritual every patch day where I wake up in a cold sweat and I check all the live data sites, because that's how a lot of our top players interact with the game now, is they log in, they check those top data sites and inform their opinion based immediately on that, based on the handful of games from our eastern regions that data has come through. And so that can set the tone for the rest of the patch. And so I have to at least be aware of that. And so I wake up, maybe not getting as much sleep as I should. I check that and I go, okay, how'd we do? Because, and keep in mind, it'll settle, it'll change, but that first impression does matter. Well, looking at this patch, the first impression seems positive, but not perfect, is the way I describe it. Certainly, the meta seems to be in a better spot. It seems to be healthier. But I think the thing that I would call quote unquote not perfect is it's a very similar patch. The stuff that's at the top is, brand, amp, marksman, stuff like that. But the good news is it's a lot healthier, right? Like if you went to any of these sites, brand before was sitting at like a 3.9. Now it's sitting at like a 4.25, which is good. And it often makes sense that the stuff people played last patch and were comfortable with and had optimized last patch are going to be played, the first day. And so that makes sense. I did manage to get one game in after my walk before I took the kids to school. I played Anima Squad. It did better. I got a third, lost to an Annie 3. Pretty standard stuff. So hopefully this is just a better version of the last patch by a significant margin. It's hard to really feel things like the less resources in one game. So I'll be playing a few more games today, but I'll keep an eye on things. But fingers crossed, it looks better so far. It looks a lot better. So we'll see. But yeah, this is my life now. I kind of nervously am like, how's the meta? How's the meta? Knowing that it's like one of those things, if you're driving off course, you can't fix the steering wheel for 2 weeks. So you're like, God, I hope we're on the right track, and you do the best you can, but yeah. Yeah, otherwise, keep an eye on things. Otherwise, I've been working on set 15. Yesterday, started to deep dive that, went through most of the one costs. Only one seemed off, so team will get that fixed. No big deal. Otherwise, things are looking good. So yeah. All right, so questions. And again, I kind of already answered half of these in the previous runs, but first question was, have you noticed an uptick in certain augment popularity, given that augment stats are now hidden? And the answer to this is not going to be a surprising answer. The answer is not really. A lot of the patterns of augments haven't really changed a whole lot. For example, when data was public and live, if you sorted by popularity, number one was Portable Forge, right? Because Portable Forge is this flexible augment you can play from a variety of lines. And artifacts are fun, and people want to play with those artifacts and hit those high highs. Well, if you looked at our data right now and you sorted by how often people are playing an augment, guess what would be number one? Portable Forge. This is not shocking. This has not changed. Another example of this is augments that are tied to specific traits that are doing really, really well tend to have a higher play rate. So, for example, in 14.1, anything exotech related, yes, those augments were strong, don't get me wrong, but those augments had very high play rates. Whereas now you look at 14.3 and it's like freestyling and anything street demon related, very high pick rates. This is not shocking, right? Like this hasn't changed. The only big difference is like, let's say hypothetically there was an augment that was like 4 or like 3.9, right? Like let's make up a really high number here. If players don't quite realize that, then the pick rate is a little lower. But a lot of the times when we talk about pick rate as terms as like number of games played, it's really tied to just how flexible it is, right? Something like freestyling, which is tied to Street Demon, is picked a significant amount less than something like Portable Forge, regardless of the data, because oftentimes you're not in a position, or it's just frankly offered more, right? Like freestyling only really appears after 2-1, if you're playing Street Demon. And so it's like a lot of these flex augments will have really, really high pick rates. So that hasn't changed. And a lot of the times the pick rate is dependent on how often you can get into that line. Now, what's interesting is back in the day, we also had a different metric of data, which was pick rate relative to appearance rate. Because like, for example, right now, if you look at like how often something in the black market is being picked, the answer is really, really low because it appears really, really low, right? Like something like Cruel Pact is in like less than 0.05% of games because it just doesn't appear that often. Does that mean it's not popular? Not really. It just means it never appears. Back in the day, we had another metric, and I actually need to update some of our internal stuff so we can see this again. But we had another metric, which was pick rate relative to appearance rate. And what that would mean is how often when an augment was shown, was it picked, right? And this was really interesting because it would tell us like how excited people were to take it or how powerful it was. And I always remember that because like back in the day, augments, like Portable Forge was still very, very high. People just really liked that augment, but it wasn't like number one. There were a couple other augments that were, I forget. But I always remember because like a really exciting popular augment would sit at like 60%. And you have to imagine it, right? Because like you're supposed to only be at about 33%, one third of the time you're being picked when you're being offered. Might even be less than that now with the rerolls. So 33% was good. So something sitting at 60% was like very popular and very, very picked a lot. But by comparison, I'll always remember the old Future Sight, not the current Future Sight, but the old Future Sight was sitting at like 2.1%. And it was like, players do not like this augment. Not that it's weak necessarily. It's just like, nobody's having fun being like, I can't wait to sign up to have to Zephyr every frickin' round. Yay, and so that kind of gave us insight onto like what type of augments people like. And so oftentimes if you listen to me talk and I generalize, oh, people love Birthday Present or they love Prismatic Pipeline, it was because I had data like that would show me how often people were picking it relative to how often it appears. But again, like when you're having this conversation with challengers, the way they perceive it is like, well, why would I pick this augment? It has a 4.7 or a 4.6. But that's not how the majority of our audience interacts with augments. So I'm getting a little off topic, but the TLDR here is, have we seen an uptick in augment popularity based? Not really. Things haven't changed that much. So, yeah. Next question was, what inspired you to make Double Up? It's pretty obvious in the sense that we had launched TFT. It was a really, really fun game. And, but the thing with any video game is, and I learned this at Nintendo very, very early, which was you can take a bad game, and if you play it with 3 of your friends, you're still going to have fun. And I think there's tons of examples of this, of like, man, what's that streaming category where people play those games that are just like torture devices, but it's like, can they beat it? But they're playing with friends. It's like playing anything with somebody else inherently makes a game more fun. And so when you're designing a multiplayer game, you have to be really, really careful. You're not falling into the trap of, oh, we're having fun because we all like each other and we're playing, you have to make sure your core is fun and then start expanding into multiplayer when you're developing a game. And so with TFT, we had a good core that was really, really fun to play. People would like watching each other. It was doing well. But there wasn't really a way to play with like your significant other or your friend. And so we wanted to make a mode that like you and someone else could play together as co-op, because people were playing together in like solo queue, but it was like, oh, cool, I went 8th and you went 2nd and I'm sitting around for 15 minutes. Yay. That doesn't feel good. Any skill discrepancy gets really unfun there. So that's not great. So we wanted to make a mode that would cover that. And so we actually, early on in Double Up, we tried, something pretty departure, like radically different from TFT, which was you and a friend each controlled 5 units on a board, assuming you were level 5. Like the leveling curve was you start at level 2 and could go all the way up to level 5. You each got that many units. but you interacted on one board. That was the first thing we tried. And what we learned was trying to make a game, like TFT is already a pretty complicated game. You have to learn a lot of things, learn econ and leveling and whatever. And then you switch modes and all those lessons are gone because all the rules are completely different. That's not very fun. That is not great. And so a lot of people are just like, nope, this just feels weird. I don't like it. So early on we learned, and this is applied to all of our game modes we've made since then, is like, it kind of needs to be pretty close to TFT. So then from there, it was like, okay, now that we have this game that's close to TFT, and yeah, we can do something really easy where it's like you guys share health bars, no problem. But we wanted to make sure that it just didn't feel like two people playing a single player game, and then occasionally, health bars are sharing or whatever. It needed to feel like you're actually working together. And that was a big goal. And I think the big moment that was like, okay, this is double up, was when reinforcements were pitched. And it was like, okay, after a limited time, if you finish your fight, whatever you have left, you can go help your friends. And that gave double up the feeling of like, it's a little bit different, but it's still the core, but it still feels like double up. And so ever since then, we've been kind of like dealing with small things here and there. For example, one of the things we didn't want was what we call quarterbacking, which is, imagine if you have somebody who's very high skill and someone low skill, and the high skill player is just basically playing both boards. That's not great. So we tried to eliminate as much of that as we could. But early on, when you used to be able to share items however you wanted, it was like there were strategies where you would send all the items to one person, and the other person would play bruisers and stall, and that was really unhealthy. So we have, then we ended up changing that. But by doing that, it made it feel a lot less cooperative, which wasn't great. So we had to adjust that. Now we've got the canon back in. So overall, we've been making adjustments. But again, the core vision for the game has always been double up is where if you've got a group of friends and you want to play TFT together, you should go play double up. It's more fun there. That's why, because, as I just said, more fun there. It's why we're kind of okay with it having like a little more resources or things like that. Now, that being said, current state of double up, right now we have this problem. Even when we've pulled back on the resources over and over and over, 3-star forecasts are still really easy to hit. And this has been true for pretty much all of double up. I think we got it to a point near the end of set 12 where it wasn't quite as true, but it was still kind of true. But it was also less fun because the way it was not true was like player damage was so high. So you die before you could even have a chance, which wasn't great. But yeah, right now it's way too common. If you watch the double up event, it was like, and I talked to Boxbox while I was there, and he was very excited, and he said, the first 15 minutes of double up are better than core TFT. I'm having more fun than core TFT. Again, the friends and things like that. But the back half of double up, where it turns into this weird ass denial game, because if somebody hits a 3-star forecast, you're in trouble, and that's not very fun. And having to constantly scout people's boards to see what 3-star forecasts they're going for and trying to deny them, not very fun. And I agree for what it's worth. Though I do think it's funny to say this in the same time we saw so many 3-star forecasts go 8th or 4th because their partner wasn't set up for success. And so it's like, well, then maybe you didn't manage your resources properly and maybe that's not the right strategy. But that being said, it is still an issue. We talked about potential solves that could, work there. But I do think in the short term, we are going to have to figure out a way that it doesn't just feel like whoever gets the best first 3-star forecast wins, or that it doesn't have that big a difference. And we might have to break some of our conventions to make that true, which is unfortunate because, again, you don't want the feeling of solo queue to be that different from double up. So this is an exaggeratory example, but let's say 3-star forecasts were literally half as powerful in double up, right? It's like, you could get used to that, but it would definitely feel weird. You'd have this moment where it's like, yes, we hit a 3-star forecast. Oh, wait, it's double up. Never mind. I'm not supposed to be excited about this. And so there's some things to do there and some tests, but we'll do our best to work on it. All right. Next question. Someone asked about a Legends retrospective. Now, by the way, this is as far as I've gotten in my talks today before tech issues appear. So now I actually get to answer fresh questions in my head. But someone was asking about a Legends retrospective. And this one's interesting because I've talked about it a bit in passing in like random AMAs and things like that. But Legends definitely have some pros and cons. And someday when I retire, I'll tell the full story of Legends and how they came to be and things like that, because some of it is stuff where you're like, didn't they think this would happen before they made it? And it's like, well, yeah, we did, but there were other factors, and it's complicated. But let's talk about the pros and cons of Legends, right? Like, one of the immediate pros that a lot of people who love it is like, TFT is a hard game, but knowing I can go in with this power up that I've picked that allows me to have a little bit better control and a little bit deal with the randomness feels good. The most common version of this for low elo players was Twisted Fate, where because you could guarantee Pandoras, and it's like, man, I am tired of having to dig for random items. I just want to like look up a guide, build my Ginsus on my AD carry, and make sure I get it. I can take Pandoras every game. I can enjoy, because I've talked about this before, that a large percentage of our audience does like to just like log in, play the comp they saw Soju play last time, and have fun. That's how they enjoy the game, and that's fine, right? We should be supporting that. And so Legends helped that a little bit, right? Like, Legends allowed for that to happen. So, not a bad thing. But on the other end of the spectrum, Legends had some pretty bad effects at the top level of play. And I always sum this up as, when you start, like, the best version of TFT, if we go down to its core vision, is when you start TFT, there is an infinite path of possibilities of things you could play that game, right? Infinite's an exaggeration, but like, you know, you could play any champion, any whatever, fast 8, whatever. Like, your path's branch should be very open. And as things happen in the game, those branches narrow, right? So you got dropped a sword and a bow and a rod. That is going to change what comps you should consider playing right away. Or, hey, your first few shops had 7 Shakos in them. That's going to change the branch of path. Okay, I'm going to keep going. The phone rang with a spam call, which apparently stops the video. Yay! I got to figure out a better way to do these, man. So if this ends up being 2 parts, that's why. So, yay. Freaking tech, man. I'm sure there's a way to like turn it off to block call. Whatever. I'm tilted. Anyway, as I was saying, the game is at its best when there's like an infinite number of paths and you react to the things that happen after the game starts. And the worst version of TFT is when, like, you know, I think a lot of players complain about this, or at least they perceive it this way, is like, well, actually, I only react to the things that happen at 2-1, and after that, I've already picked a single path. And now the game is kind of like branched out. And if that single path doesn't work out, it's the game's fault, right? When the reality is, well, it's like, well, you could have maybe played a single path and then steered when you got these champions and then made this change. Or, you know, like the best version of it is you're constantly swaying and swinging between potential paths until around stage 4, where it's like, okay, based on the augments, based on all the champions I'm hitting and the items I have so far, here is the path I end up in. That's the best version of TFT. And the ultimate version that we push towards with all of our changes, with future set mechanics and things like that. Legends very much limited that, right? Legends were inherently like, hey, at the start of the game, I've already eliminated all these other paths because I've taken this thing, you know, whether it was like the Ornn version or I forget the other one that was really popular, but it's like I've already, before the game has even started, I've blocked out all these other potential paths. And that isn't great. And so every version of Legends we talk about, it's like you have to combat that. Like, some players want that control where they do want to eliminate those paths, but at the top level play, eliminating those paths makes the game less interesting. And so whatever solution we come up with in the future needs to be a version that like merges those two realities. Now, what's interesting is after we shipped Legends, FFGS actually put Legends in one of their set revivals. And they did a version that was very similar to my first pitch for Legends, which was, instead of it just being like you always get this one augment, it was you get from this pool of augments. Now, we originally shot that down because we thought the UX would be too complicated of trying to figure out, you know, what type of augments you want and look at this giant list. That would be really intimidating. FFGS tried it, and it was, hilariously enough, it did exactly what you'd expect, which is it had, you know, it was less restrictive in the game, which is good, but the people who wanted that direct control were less happy. So it felt like the red mage of solutions. So We still think there's an interesting design space there possible where pre-game you make a selection of something, but again, it has to be make a selection of something that doesn't shrink the branching paths towards reacting to how the game plays, and especially with how we know challenger players in particular perceive our game, where it's like, a really dumb example, and I'm being, again, exaggeratory here, but let's say you could, at the start of the game, choose between your team gains 50 health and your team gains 5% attack speed, right? Challengers would essentially go, this is the right answer, or if there isn't a right answer, if they're like, look, either choice is fine, but if you choose health, don't play these lines, and if you choose attack speed, don't play these lines, right? Like, that's the thing, and it's such a small number, but when you're trying to optimize the game and get every little advantage you can and speak in hyperbole and things like that, that's sort of the margins we're dealing with. So and nobody before the game wants to pick 50 HP or 5 attack speed. That's boring, right? You want something more impactful than that, but the more impactful you make it, the more impact it has to those decisions. And so that's kind of where we're at design-wise. We're kind of at that impasse where it's like, it's a give and take, and neither side looks perfect. So until we find the magic bullet that solves that, we're probably not revisiting Legends. But it definitely, again, it's a very rich space. So hopefully that acted as your retrospective. Now, the next question I'm supposed to answer is about utility units. This is one I think that's got the most upvotes. I'm going to wait till tomorrow. I want to give that one the start of a video. That way, because it's a long one, and it's also a really awkward one because I have to tread some lines. So I'm going to skip that one for now. I might just end the video here. The only other one was my online presence post TFT, which is another complicated one. I'm going to save it for now. I'm going to see if I can merge these videos. This is already awkward and coming in late, and I need to get to work. So sorry this was scuffed today. I'll try again tomorrow. I'm learning things like apparently phone calls break the video, or how to hold the stick or whatever. So I don't know. It's been a weird day. So hopefully you guys enjoy. A little scuffed. We'll try again tomorrow. All right. That's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.